The firefighter and the decision. It was a hot summer day in a small town. Marcus, an experienced firefighter, had just returned from a long operation when suddenly the alarm sounded. A house nearby was on fire. Without hesitating, Marcus got into the fire truck and drove with his team to the scene. When they arrived, the fire was already very large. Black smoke rose into the sky, and the flames were coming out of the roof. Neighbors stood in front of the house, looking very scared. A woman shouted, "My child! My child is still inside." Marcus knew he had to act quickly. He put on his protective gear and ran into the burning house. The fire was very hot, and the wood in the house was creaking loudly. He had to hurry. In the hallway, he heard two sounds. From the living room, he heard the crying of a child. From another room, he heard the weak voice of an old woman. Marcus had to make a difficult decision. Should he save the child or the old woman? He knew he didn't have enough time to save both. The fire was spreading quickly. Marcus decided to follow the sound of the crying child. He found the little girl under a table, shaking and scared. "Come, I'll get you out of here," Marcus said calmly, and he picked up the child. With the girl in his arms, he fought his way through the burning house and got outside. He gave the child to the paramedics. Suddenly, he heard a loud crash. The roof of the house collapsed. Marcus knew it was too late to save the old woman. He felt guilty and sad. Should he have saved the old woman? But when he saw the face of the girl now safe, he knew he had made the right decision. Later, after the firefighters had put out the fire, the paramedics came to Marcus. "The child you saved is safe. But we found out something surprising," said one of the paramedics. "This child is your nephew. Your sister lost him years ago and didn't know where he was." Marcus was shocked. "How is that possible?" he asked, confused. The paramedic answered, "The old woman you couldn't save was the child's grandmother. She had kept the child hidden all these years." Marcus couldn't believe it. The woman he couldn't save was the only person who knew where his nephew had been all these years. It was a bittersweet moment. He had saved one life but lost another. But he knew that in that moment, he had made the best decision he could. The surgeon's choice. Dr. Muller was a respected surgeon in a big city. He had saved many lives and was known for his calm manner and skilled hands. One day, he received a call that would change his life. Two patients needed surgery urgently, but there was only one operating room available. The first patient was a wealthy businessman, Mr. Schneider. He had a lot of money and regularly donated large sums to the hospital. The second patient was a homeless man, known by no one. He had no family, no money, and no one to care for him. Dr. Muller faced a tough decision. Should he operate on the rich businessman who donated money to the hospital? Or should he operate on the homeless man who needed the surgery much more urgently? After a long time thinking, Dr. Muller decided to operate on the homeless man. Everyone deserves a chance, no matter how much money they have, he thought. He knew it was the right decision, even though it might cost the hospital a lot of money. The surgery began. Dr. Muller and his team worked with full concentration. The situation was difficult, but Dr. Muller stayed calm and successfully performed the surgery. When the homeless man woke up, Dr. Muller was by his side. "You made it," he said, smiling. The man nodded gratefully. The next day, Dr. Muller went to his office. The hospital's director was waiting for him. "Mr. Muller, we need to talk," he said seriously. "Why didn't you operate on the rich businessman? He donates a lot of money to our hospital. We could have used that money." Dr. Muller explained his decision. "I couldn't do otherwise. The homeless man needed the operation more. I made my decision based on what I thought was right." The director sighed, but before he could say anything, the homeless man entered the office. He looked Dr. Muller directly in the eyes and said, "I have something to confess to you." Dr. Muller looked confused. "What do you want to say?" he asked. The man smiled. "I am not really homeless. I am actually Mr. Schneider, the rich businessman. I disguised myself as a homeless person to see what you would decide. Dr. Muller was surprised. Why did you do that? He asked. Mr. Schneider answered, I wanted to see if you would act for the money or your conscience. You chose the right thing, and for that, I am grateful. Dr. Muller could hardly believe it. What does this mean for the hospital? He asked cautiously. Mr. Schneider smiled and said, the hospital will receive more money than ever before. I will donate an even larger sum. You have shown that a human life is more important than money. Dr. Muller felt relieved. He had made the right decision, and the hospital would still benefit. It was a moment that showed him it is always right to follow one's conscience. The end. The mother's tough choice. Marta was a single mother who dedicated her life to her son Tim's well-being. She worked hard to provide for him and saved every cent she could to give him a good education. Tim was a smart boy, and Marta wanted to give him every chance in life. One day, Marta received bad news. During a doctor's visit, she learned that she had a serious illness and needed urgent surgery. The surgery was expensive, and Marta knew her savings were not enough for both the operation and Tim's education. Marta was desperate. Should she use the money for the surgery and save her own life? Or should she keep it for Tim's education and risk not living long enough to see him grow up? After many sleepless nights and deep talks with her friends, Marta decided to have the surgery. I have to be healthy to be there for Tim, she told herself. It was not an easy decision, but she knew that was the only way to keep taking care of her son. The surgery was complicated but successful. Marta slowly recovered, but the worry about Tim's future remained. She knew it would be hard to save money for his education, but she hoped that things would work out somehow. A few weeks after the surgery, Marta received a letter from Tim's school. It was an unexpected moment of surprise and joy. Tim had received a full scholarship to a prestigious school. The scholarship covered all costs, from school fees to books. Marta could hardly believe it. How could this be possible? She read the letter again and noticed a small note at the end. This scholarship was funded by an anonymous person who once faced a similar decision. Marta was overwhelmed with gratitude. Someone who had been in her situation had decided to help others facing similar challenges. She knew this generosity would change Tim's life. While holding the letter, Marta thought about all the tough decisions she had made as a mother. This one decision, choosing to have the surgery, had not only saved her life, but also opened the door to a better future for Tim. Marta knew that life is full of challenges and decisions, but now she was sure that there is always hope as long as one believes in the good. And sometimes, she thought, life comes together in unexpected and wonderful ways. The second chance. Mrs. Miller was a teacher at a small school in a quiet town. She loved her job and cared deeply for her students. For her, it was important that every student had the chance to improve and learn. One day, she noticed something unusual during a class test. Lucas, a usually quiet and unnoticed student, suddenly seemed to know all the answers. Mrs. Miller became suspicious and watched him more closely. She saw that Lucas had a small cheat sheet hidden under his notebook. Her heart sank. She knew that as a teacher, she had the duty to report this. But she couldn't bring herself to punish Lucas immediately. Instead, she decided to talk to Lucas after class. Lucas, can you stay for a moment after the lesson? She asked kindly. Lucas nodded, but his face showed that he knew what it was about. After the lesson, Mrs. Muller sat down with Lucas. Lucas, I noticed something today that worries me, she began carefully. I saw you cheated during the test. Why did you do that? Lucas looked down, embarrassed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Muller. I just didn't know how to solve the tasks. I tried, but I don't understand the material. Mrs. Muller thought for a moment. She remembered her own school days when she had been in a similar situation. Back then, she had also cheated because she didn't understand the material. but her teacher had given her a second chance and helped her learn. Lucas, I understand how you feel, but cheating is not the solution. I want to help you understand the material so you don't have to cheat next time. Are you willing to stay after school and learn with me? Mrs. Muller asked kindly. Lucas was surprised. He had expected punishment, not that Mrs. Miller wanted to help him. Yes, Mrs. Muller, that would be great. I really want to understand what we're learning. In the following weeks, Lucas stayed after school regularly and learned with Mrs. Muller. She patiently explained the topics he didn't understand and gave him tips on how to learn better. Lucas began to understand the content, and his confidence grew. One day, a big exam was coming up. Lucas was nervous, but he remembered everything Mrs. Muller had taught him. He sat down, focused, and took the test. When the results were announced, Lucas could hardly believe it. He had gotten a very good grade. Mrs. Muller was proud of Lucas. You did it, Lucas. You worked hard and passed the exam without cheating. That is a great achievement. Lucas smiled proudly. Thank you, Mrs. Muller. I couldn't have done it without your help. But the story didn't end there. Through Mrs. Miller's help, Lucas not only understood the material, but also found joy in learning. He started helping other students who had similar problems like he had. Soon, he was not only a good student, but also a tutor for others. One day, Mrs. Muller told Lucas a story from her own school days. You know, Lucas, she began, when I was your age, I also cheated once. But my teacher gave me a second chance and helped me learn. Now I'm doing the same for you. Lucas was astonished. I didn't know that, Mrs. Muller. Thank you for giving me a second chance, too. Mrs. Muller smiled. Everyone deserves a second chance, Lucas. And I am glad you took yours. The end.